In this video, we're going to tackle task 4, which is discounting costs and qualies to present values. So if you recall in task 2 and 3, on the model sheet, we calculated the transition matrix, the sample path, and then the costs and the qualies for treatment A, and then for treatment B. And these costs were not all in the present time period, cycle 1. Some of the costs are in cycle 2, 3, 4, all the way up to cycle 60. And then we have cycle 61, which we'll be using for the half cycle correction, which I'll explain later. So some of these costs are in future years. And it's common practice to discount future costs to a present value. A cost that arises next year or the year after is not given the same value as a cost that arises this year for various reasons. And the same applies to qualies. So not all of the qualies arise in the present time period. Some of them are the next month or the month after. And some of the qualies arise years from now. And these qualies that arise 5 years from now, again, they're not given the same value as qualies that arise this cycle or the next cycle. So it's common practice to discount both the costs and the qualies. And so that's the purpose of this step, to apply discounting to both the costs and the qualies. And as it says in the instructions, there is a debate in the literature about whether we should have a common discount rate for costs and qualies or different discount rates. And I'm not going to get into all of the theory and all of that debate in this exercise. So just be aware that there is a big debate out there. For the purpose of this exercise, we're just going to use a simple common discount rate that applies to both costs and qualies. And we're going to use a discount rate of 1.5% per year, which is the discount rate that is currently recommended here in Canada, where I'm based, by the Canadian Agency for Drugs and Technologies in Health, so CADTH, which is the main HTA agency in Canada. We're going to just use that. If you were building a model in a different jurisdiction, you would use the discount rate recommended by whatever the relevant HTA body is in that jurisdiction. But the principles are the same. So the first step here is enter the correct settings on the settings sheet. So let's go to the settings sheet, and you'll see there's a couple of new settings that have appeared. The first is the discount rate per year. So this needs to be 1.5%. And you'll see that the percentage has already been entered here. If you are building your own model, be very, very careful, because if you enter 1.5 and then you change that to a percentage, it will be 150%, which is not what you want. So make sure you've actually entered 1.5% or 0.015 if you wish, and not 150%. And then the discount approach, well, there are two approaches. There's continuous discounting and discrete discounting. And the standard approach in practice is to use discrete discounting. So select discrete discounting. Okay, so step 4.1 has been completed now. And you'll see that there's a new tab, discounting, that has appeared. So on the discounting sheet, we're going to take those costs and those qualies that we calculated in tasks 2 and 3, and we're going to apply discounting to those. And one way to make our lives easier is to first calculate what we call the discount factors. Now, discount factors are just a number that you calculate for each cycle, and you multiply the costs and the qualies by that number in order to get the discounted costs and qualies. So if you were not applying discounting, which is the case in the very first cycle, well, then that number that you want to multiply the costs and the qualies by is 1. When you multiply by 1, they're not going to change. And in future cycles, when you wish to apply discounting, well, then that number, that discount factor, will be less than 1. And when you multiply by a number less than 1, of course, that will be discounted, right? The cost will be discounted. There'll be a smaller cost as we wish, and a smaller quality. So the first task is to calculate the discount factors. And once we've done that, we can apply them to our costs and qualies in each cycle to get the discounted costs and qualies. And the discount factors depend on whether we're using continuous or discrete discounting. You recall a few moments ago on the settings sheet, we said we're going to use discrete. Well, that might be changed to continuous. So we need to make sure that our model allows for the user to change the setting from discrete to continuous and vice versa. So we're going to calculate the relevant discount factors under each approach, and then we're going to have a value used cell which pulls in the appropriate discount factors based on the setting on the settings sheet. So first thing we need to do is the discount factor for continuous discounting. The reason we do that one first is that it's slightly easier than discrete. So if we do continuous first, we can then build upon it in a few moments to do discrete. So under continuous discounting, you discount continuously throughout the year. So you will have a discount factor of 1 to begin with. You don't discount in the first cycle, but then you're going to have a discount factor that's below 1 in cycle 2. So even a cost that arises just 1 month from now, you would discount a tiny bit. And then in cycle 3, you discount a tiny bit more than that. And then after 12 cycles, so a year from now, you would be discounting at 1.5% per annum, right? So the same as you would under the discrete approach. So how are we going to do this? So we need to take into account a couple of things here. We need to take into account the discount rate, and we need to take into account the number of cycles per year. So we're assuming that there's 12 cycles per year, but that could change, at least in principle. So let's come up with a formula that takes both of those things into account. So the first thing to think about is, and this is given in hint 1, the discount factor is given by 1 divided by 1 plus whatever that discount rate is, and then close the brackets around the 1 plus the discount rate and raise those brackets to the power of how many years have elapsed from the present. So under continuous discounting, these years are broken down into partial years, but with discrete discounting, they're not. So what sort of formula can we use? So we'll do an equals, and of course it's 1 divided by, and then we open our brackets, and we need to do 1 plus the discount factor. So that is 1 plus the discount factor is S underscore discount rate. And then we close the bracket, and we do it to the power of. So if you hold down Shift and press the number 6, you get that hat symbol. On most keyboards, it would be Shift and 6. And what's it going to be to the power of? Well, it's the power of the number of years from the present. So that's a little bit tricky. So one way of calculating this would be to look at the cycles, which are in row 21. So I'm going to open a couple of brackets now, and I'm going to take the number of cycles here, so that's 1. And if you were to divide that by the number of cycles per year, that would tell us how many years have passed. What I'm going to do though is, because we use cycle 1 in this model to indicate the present, I'm just going to subtract 1 to begin with. And then I'm going to divide this by the number of cycles per year. And then I'm going to finish by closing the brackets. So what this is going to do is it's going to look at the cycle number. It's going to subtract 1, and that will give us the number of cycles from the present. So when it's cycle 1, well, that's going to be 0 cycles from the present. When we're in cycle 2, that is 1 cycle from the present, and so on. And then we're going to divide this by the number of cycles per year to give us the number of years from the present. And we're going to raise 1 plus the discount rate to the power of the number of years from the present. Okay, so you can see that the discount factor is 1 in the first cycle, but then very slightly less in cycle 2, and then a bit less than that in cycle 3, and so on. And for this particular exercise, for this task, I should say, we are not just going over 6 cycles as we usually do. We are copying this formula out to 13. And the reason we do that is 13 takes us into year 2. And as you can see with continuous discounting, it just falls very, very gradually. It makes no difference when we pass that 1 year mark. We continue to just reduce that discount factor very, very slightly. It's nice and smooth. Okay, what about discrete discounting? So this is slightly different, because under discrete discounting, we do not discount at all during year 1. So that is cycles 1 through to 12. We are not going to discount at all during this period. And then we need to discount at 1.5% from cycles 13 up to 24. All right, so slightly more difficult than continuous discounting. So how do we account for, we need to figure out whether we're still in year 1, right, that first year. And make sure there's no discounting at all. So one way of doing this would be, take the formula that we've got here for continuous, and I'm going to just copy that. I'm going to press escape So to close that, I'm going to click on here. I'm going to click in the formula bar, right click and paste, but I'm not going to, oh, I didn't mean to do that. I'm going to right click and paste, but I'm not going to press enter just yet. And we need to adjust this. So instead of it giving us partial years, we just want this to be, whole years. And one way of doing that would be to click here, just between those two brackets, and use the round down function. And round down will round down a number. And so I'm going to open a new bracket. So the value that we're going to round down is all of this. Okay, that's what we're going to round down. And then after this value, I'm going to click just here between the word year and the closed bracket. I'm going to put a comma. And the round down function wants to know how many decimal places. So it's actually 0. We need 0 decimal places, so it just gives us the integer, number of years from the present. And then we need to close the bracket like that, and then press enter. So in cycle 1, this is exactly the same as it is under continuous discounting. But look what happens, and it's happy with this. The formula copies correctly to other cells. We've got a discount factor of 1 in every cycle in the first year, all the way up to cycle 12. And then what happens? When we get to cycle 13, this round down is now rounding down 1. This rounds down to 1. And so we're doing 1 plus the discount rate to the power of 1. So we're discounting at 1.5%. Look at those, they're exactly the same. And that's not a coincidence. So in the very first cycle of the new year, continuous discounting and discrete discounting give us exactly the same thing. But for this last cycle of the first year, this round down is rounding it down to 0. And when you have 1 plus the discount rate to the power of 0, well, anything to the power of 0 is just 1. So all of this just becomes 1. 1 divided by 1 is 1, and that's why the discount factor is 1. So thing to bear in mind with discrete discounting is we do not discount for the first 12 cycles of the model, and then we discount from cycle 13, and it's by exactly the same amount as we would under continuous discounting in that particular cycle. Okay, so now we are on to step 4.4, and we need to select the appropriate discount factors in the used value row. And this just depends on what we had on the settings sheet. So recall in this cell here, which is called S_discounting approach, we're going to use that. And if that equals continuous, well, then we want to use the discount factors from the continuous row. And if it's discrete, we want the discount factors from the discrete row. So we start with equals, and we're going to do an if statement. So if, and then open the brackets. And for those of you who've not done an if statement before, there are 3 parts to the if statement. The first is some kind of logical expression. And so I'm going to say S_discounting approach. And instead of typing out, I'm just going to click there. If S_discounting approach equals, and I'm going to say continuous, and I'm going to put this in quotes. You can't just type continuous. You have to do a double quote, and then finish with double quotes, like that. If you miss out the double quotes, it won't work properly. So that is my logical expression. Discounting approach equals continuous. And this is either true or false. Right now it's false, because we've selected discrete on that setting sheet. But if someone was to go into the setting sheet and change that to continuous, well, then this logical statement would be true. Now I'm going to do a comma, and the first thing we put after the comma is the value if this is true. So if this logical statement is true, that the discounting approach on the setting sheet is continuous, well, then I want D22. And then I'm going to do another comma. If it's false, then I want the other one, D23. And then because I opened a bracket for the if statement, I need to close that bracket. So there's our first if statement. If the discounting approach is continuous, then give us row 22, otherwise give us row 23, and this will be copied across to all of the other cycles. So it makes absolutely no difference in the first cycle, but you can see, look, we are using discrete discounting here. And if on the setting sheet we had continuous selected instead, it would be giving these values here would be the same as these. So that's step 4.4 complete. Step 4.5 has been enabled now. So what is step 4.5? Enable a half cycle correction on the settings sheet. Okay, so let's go back to the settings sheet, and we have a new setting here, half cycle correction, and we're going to select yes. And I'll let you read in the instructions about what the half cycle correction is, but in a nutshell, when you have a Markov model or any other kind of state transition model where patients move at discrete time points, right? Patients, they can only move at the end of a month. So patients stay in the same state for a whole month, and then some of them move at the end of the month. And then if they move to a new state, well, they'll stay there for at least 1 month. So it's like a clock that just ticks once a month, and you can only move states on a tick of the clock. You can't move states midway through. And this is very simplistic to model, but it's not realistic in the real world, because in the real world, people can die, people can become sick halfway through the month, right? That can happen, or at the beginning of the month or towards the end. On average, it's going to happen close to the middle of the month. And so the half cycle correction is one means of effectively moving the point in time when patients move from one state to another to the middle of the month rather than the end. And it's been subject to criticism. It's not perfect. There are other approaches that have been recommended in the literature to replace the half cycle correction. But for now, the half cycle correction is used by most HTA agencies, and so it's what we're using right now in this exercise, but it is certainly not the only means for making this kind of correction. So how would we do this? We first of all, before we apply the half cycle correction, we need to apply the discounting, and then we will use the half cycle correction in a couple of moments when we calculate the total costs. So step 4.6, discount the costs for treatment A for 1 cycle. So let's go back to the discounting sheet. You can see a few more rows have appeared, and here we need to discount the costs for treatment A in each cycle. So how are we going to do that? First of all, we need to pull in the costs from the model sheet. So equals, and then on the model sheet, where were the costs for treatment A in, and we should talk about the aggregated costs here, in cycle 1. It looks like it's in D64. And then we need to discount them, don't we? So we're going to multiply that by, and I'm going to go back to the discounting sheet, and I'm going to multiply it by D24. So don't click on D23, even though, yes, we want to use discrete discounting, use the value used row so that in future, if a user changes that setting on the setting sheet to use continuous discounting, it will update everything automatically. So that's what we want, D24. And I'm thinking about in future, we might want to copy this down, this formula. I'm just going to put in a dollar symbol there just before the 24, not before the D, just for a future step if we want to copy this down. And I'm going to press enter. Okay, so you can see that that has been copied across, and in E34, it's not referencing D64, it's now E, and it's also referencing the discount factor for cycle 2, which is what we want. And in cycle 3, that's also referencing the discount factor for cycle 3. So it's really important that we don't put in the dollar symbols before the F. And also on the model sheet, it's pulling in F64. And if we go back, F64 was this one here. So the aggregated total cost for cycle 3. And so this is pulling in the correct values, the correct costs from the model sheet, and applying the correct discount factors. And you can now see that we're on to step 4.7, which is to derive the total discounted costs for treatment A. And so the discounting sheet has expanded again, and we've got all 61 cycles here. And you might want to use this hide columns in Q14. I'm just going to click that. It takes a couple of seconds to hide the columns, but it makes it much quicker just to go left and right now. So we need to put in a formula into BM D34 for the total discounted aggregated costs for treatment A. And this is not actually straightforward. You might think, well, we just sum all of these, don't we? Starting at 1 and going on. It's not that simple, because if we want to apply a half cycle correction, then we have to take into account that under the half cycle correction, and I'll let you read this through in your own time, why we apply the half cycle correction, how you do it. But basically, you only apply half of the cost in the first cycle, and then you apply the full cost in cycles 2, 3, 4, and so on. And to make up for having only half in the first cycle, we're going to take half from cycle 61. Even though our cycle length is only 60, we're going to take half a cycle from the next cycle, 61. So that's how the half cycle correction works. And so there's a couple of hints here which are going to help with writing this formula. I should also say before we continue, if we're not applying a half cycle correction, then you do literally just want to sum from 1 all the way up to 60. You can't see it just here because I've hidden the columns. But you would not be doing half of cycle 1 and half of cycle 61 if you did not have a half cycle correction. So this is, not straightforward. This is probably the most difficult formula that we've done so far. So where do we start with this? So if you look at hint 1, it says the index function is very helpful. If you put in index and then D34 to BL34, which is this whole range that we've got just here, and then you do comma 1, comma S time horizon, that will return a reference for the cell containing the cost for cycle N, where the time horizon is N cycles. Okay, so this index function, you first of all put in the range, and then you want, I believe it's the rows, if I recall from memory, and then the columns. So it's going to be row 1 within this range, and then column is S time horizon. That's how far along you want to go. And that will return a reference for the cell containing the cost for cycle N. And so that can be used within a sum function. So what I'm going to do is, just to save a bit of time, I'm going to copy this sum function. Going to copy that, and then I'm going to go across to here, and we're going to begin with this. So we'll start with equals. So this is taking the sum from D34, which is here, all the way to whatever the time horizon is. So we've got this index D34 to BL34, and within this index function, we've got the range, then we've got the row 1, and then up to column, whatever the time horizon is, right? So 60 by default. Okay, so that's a good way of starting this. Then what we do is we say plus, and then we have an if statement. So if the half cycle correction is set to yes, so we're going to do S underscore half cycle correction. And if our logical statement is if that equals yes, then we wish to apply this half cycle correction. And how do we apply half cycle correction? We have to subtract half of the very first cycle. So in order to do that, I'm going to say minus, and then what was the first cycle? That was D34. And we're going to just divide that by 2. Okay. And then what I might do is I'm going to just put brackets around that just to keep it very, just to make it clear. And then that's, so with the half cycle correction enabled, we're going to subtract half of whatever the value is in D34, half of that first cycle. And then we're going to add on half of the cycle immediately following the time horizon. Okay, so by default it's 60, but again, it could be any, you can change the number of cycles, right? You can change that time horizon. So what we're going to do here, we're going to have, it's going to be very similar to this, isn't it? This index. I'm going to just make a copy of this index function, and I'm going to just paste it here. And what I'm going to do though is I need to take whatever this is, and it needs to be not time horizon, but time horizon plus 1. So to get the next cycle after the end of the time horizon. And then I'm going to take whatever's in this index function. I'm going to put brackets around it just to be really, really clear. Okay, and then after that 1, I'm going to do divided by 2 and close the bracket. Okay, I like to group it. The brackets might not be necessary mathematically, but I like to group things. So we are subtracting half of the first cycle, and then we're adding half of the next cycle after the end of the time horizon, because it's time horizon plus 1. So when the time horizon is 60 cycles, we are subtracting, under this half cycle correction, half of cycle 1, and then we're adding half of cycle 61, right? And if the time horizon was, let's say, 30 cycles, well, then we would be subtracting half of cycle 1 and adding half of cycle 31. Yeah, so that's how that works. And then I don't think we need to add any more brackets. I'm just going to press enter and see if that works. Okay, it said it's got the correct value. And that's been colored green. And the good news is that we don't need to do another really complicated formula like that for a while. We can just copy this formula over. So that's really good news. The next thing we need to move on to is the discounted aggregated costs for treatment B. So very, very similar to the task we did, or the step we did 2 steps ago. So we need to pull in from the model sheet the aggregated discounted costs for treatment B in cycle 1, which is this one here. And again, it's done a funny thing here. I'm just going to change that to say equals this, and then multiplied by, I'm going to go back to the discounting sheet. I want to multiply it by the discount factor for cycle 1. Okay, let's try that. Okay, it likes it. It's tested it over 6 cycles. It's given us the correct value in each one of them. And it's opened up all 61 cycles now for the discounted aggregated cost for treatment B. I'm going to just use the hide columns because we don't need to see all of them. Okay, so the next step, so we're on to step 4.9 now, derive the total discounted cost for treatment B. And you can copy over the formula from BM34. So make sure that you're not making any inappropriate use of absolute versus relative cell references. So let's go back to the formula we did a few minutes ago. Taking a look at this, I don't think we used any absolute cell references. We've not used the dollar symbol. And also this, all it's doing is referencing the settings on the setting sheet, which are not going to change when I copy that over because we're just using named references. And there's no reference to the discounting factors. So I can't see any problem with just copying that over as is. So I'm going to just take this, I'm going to copy it, and then I'm going to go all the way over here and I'm going to right click, paste special, formula only. I'm just going to click off. So 134,000, so much higher. I believe it was 89,000 for treatment A, 134,000 for treatment B. Yeah, 89,000 for treatment A. Much more expensive to go with treatment B. So now we've got the aggregated qualities for treatment A. So on this discounting sheet, there's really 4 big tables here. There's the costs for A, the costs for B, the qualities for A, the qualities for B, and now we're on to the 3rd of them. So we're getting there. So what we need here are, from the model sheet, the aggregated qualities for treatment A in cycle 1. So that's this one in D81, and we're going to multiply that by the discount factor. So that is here, D24. And that's going to be copied across, and the marking system will test those values. Yeah, it's happy with them. So this is correct, and it's going to open up all of the cycles up to 61. And I'm going to click the hide columns in EF14 this time. Okay, and again, we can save a lot of time and energy by just taking this total formula from DX34. I'm going to copy it, but it's really important that you don't just do a straight paste. Not only does it paste the green formatting, which is not appropriate, but is also going to paste the dollar formatting, which we don't want for qualies. There won't be as many decimal places. We don't want to do that. Let's just paste the formula only, and it will keep it formatted how we want for a quali. Okay. And now finally, aggregated qualies for treatment B. So we start off by going to the model sheet and taking, I think it's right at the bottom, isn't it? The qualies treatment B aggregated, it's that one there. We're going to multiply that by the discount factor. So that's this thing here. So it's going to copy this across for the first 6 cycles, and they're all correct. It's happy with that. It's going to open out all of the cycles. I'm going to click hide columns. And for the last time, we're going to take one of the totals here from GI34. I'm going to copy it, and we're going to paste it as a formula only. So you can see 2.25 qualies with treatment B, quite a bit more than we got with treatment A. So that's the end of task 4. We've now opened task 5. Before we end the video, let's just look at that. 2.25 qualies, and treatment A was only giving us 1.73 qualies. So, you know, about, what is that? About half a quali, just over half a quali more. But we're paying 134,000 instead of 89,000. So is it worth it? Is it worth the additional cost to get that, that fraction of a quali more? And this is why in the next task, we're going to look at the incremental costs, the incremental qualies. It's a really important step on our journey to finding out whether treatment B is good value for money. So I'll see you in the next video.